Well, good afternoon, everybody. And I think a lot of context has been set, and we are going to be talking with our eyes. But please do listen to us as well. It's really going to be an interesting topic. I'm very humbled by the kind of panelists I have here, very eminent, all of them. So it's actually a pleasure and a privilege to be talking to them on this very interesting topic on how can HR promote an inclusive work environment. You'll hear from all of them. All of them are hands-on. So I'm sure we'll walk away with a lot of tips and learnings. But let me set a small context. As job seekers today, when we see our people walk into our organization, are they really looking at the job description, their role, remuneration, or maybe something beyond? What we really realize is they're trying to look at organizations as something who they can align with, somewhere where their social goals are aligned. They would want to be have a sense of belonging, a sense of being accepted, and so on. We know by now that organizations do have policies and processes to make sure that the workforce is very diverse, because it's in the interest of the organization itself to have a diverse workforce. And as we've just heard, it's going to be really boring if all of us are just cloned, right? So we know that there is a lot of diversity and a lot of step that's taken up towards it. But the success of that is ultimately in that each individual in an organization does feel included. So what is that we are seeing on the ground? How are organizations really managing it? And especially so, we've seen the last couple of years, and I think this has been one event where after a long time, I'm coming in for a face-to-face event, really interesting and good to be back. But during the pandemic, we've realized that organizations have really had been a little off in terms of the touch and feel to the employees. So let me start, Shanti, with you. There is a lot of activities that organizations have rolled out in terms of the D&I initiatives. What role do you think HR has? Is it really an HR-centric role? Is it more on what kind of support would you look for from the business? So maybe I can hear from you first.
Sure, so I'm going to answer that question with 3 words: all in commitment. It is not only HR's role to bring about diversity and inclusion. I think it's everybody's role in the organization to think about inclusion. Everybody plays a role that you're best positioned to play to be inclusive in your everyday work, right? Now, everybody sitting here, you probably are in a role in your organization where you have the privilege to make some of those policy changes, or you're the recipient for some of those policy changes, or you're probably an influencer for some of those changes, right? So you have the privilege as well as the responsibility. So I would say that taking HR as a thought partner, being your connector, and taking that business leadership to co-create a solution is where inclusion can be truly effective. It's not just about a program, it's not an initiative, it's multiple initiatives, multiple programs, multiple mindsets, multiple cultural nuances that you're bringing together in different dimensions of difference, right? So HR is in the forefront, yes. HR plays a very critical role in helping the organization think through, but it is the business leaders as well as each and every team member in that organization who's contributing to that result. So I think D&I is one such COE in a HR function that has the whole organization behind it to contribute. So while there's one team, it's still a collective goal, and it's, like I said, all in commitment. That's what I want to leave you with.
Right, that's absolutely, Shanti, and I think that really resonates with what we really see. It's action by everybody and beneficiary also being everybody, right? and that's what will make a lot of difference. Let me move on to Nandini. So, I've seen your experience list, God, the kind of sectors you worked in, manufacturing, and other sectors too. What is your take on it? Is it HR driven? Is it business driven? Is it all in commitment?
Okay, I was kind of nudging myself into sparking up the mood in the room because we are mostly HR professionals here, right? So to amplify what Shanti was mentioning, all in commitment is what you said. For me, I would be happy that day as a D&I practitioner when I see diversity, equity, and inclusion out of HR bracket. It has to be a function like quality, safety, security, reporting to business. That's when the business commitment will come. Without that, endless number of times we would voice and say business needs to own, business owns talent, people is part of sustainability. Whatever we say, it is going to fall into deaf ears. And I'm sure there are many people in the audience who's resonating to what I'm saying. And you know the pain of driving diversity, equity, and inclusion when it's not a business strategic goal. Lucky I am to be with organizations who have made diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of their strategic business driver, fed into the sustainability aspect of 2030, but yet the journey is still very, very in infant stage. So plush out diversity, equity, and inclusion as a function that reports to business. Diversity, equity, and inclusion topics should be discussed in innovation summits because diversity fuels innovation through collaboration. More diversity of thought, more collaboration leads to innovation. So I think together as HR fraternity, if we all come together as a voice, I think we will be there very soon.
I think that is a conversation we should all take to the business leaders, saying that more diversity, more collaboration, more innovation. And I think that will make them sit up and really nudge up the diversity and inclusion topic, diversity, equity, and inclusion topic much higher. So I think what both of you said sort of really resonates a lot. Let me move on to Swati. Swati, I know Amazon is one organization where there's a lot of work around all of this. And when we do look at diversity, I think we've moved a long way from gender diversity, where now it's across levels. This is looked at very closely. We've looked at cultural diversity, ethnic diversity, maybe financial backgrounds, all of that. There's a lot of focus on all of this. But maybe how are we really taking care of the unconscious bias possibly that is still there when there are leaders who are recruiting people? Do you see that is still there, or is there a conscious way that this unconscious bias can be removed? What is your take on that?
So I think we are human beings, and I think as human beings we are flawed. So irrespective of what I may believe, I'm very focused on bias, and I'm leading this practice. I think it's very normal for each one of us to have our preferences, our own backgrounds influence those preferences, our own experiences influence those preferences. What we can do, and I think that's really where a lot of our work is focused on, is making sure that we become more aware of them. And not just that we are aware of them, but they're like staring at us in the face. And I think that's where we use a lot of technology, which is... how do we use technology in a way that it's nudging you constantly, whether it's in how you're writing your job description, or how you're interviewing, or how you're actually putting down your feedback, or how you're engaging with people, so constantly. And the good thing is, in today's world, there's so much technology out there to do all of it. So you can buy, you can build, you can do a lot of stuff to really help look at bias. I do want to talk about bias at 3 levels. One, we often love to call it unconscious. I think it's super important to know that many times it is very conscious. And I think it's really, really important to call it out when it does become very obviously conscious. And then to have a very clear framework on what is acceptable as an organization and as a setup. The other is systemic, and I think that's again a super critical one because that's where the solutions are not easy. The solutions require a lot of work which go right into communities. And a lot of work that what many of my real friends here are doing are going to impact generations to come. Because what we do today is probably not going to help many people in the room today. It might make it a little better, so we call it everyday better. But the real impact of work that we do with communities or with systemic bias is truly, and the work around equity is probably going to impact 10 years, 15 years, 20 years later, and we'll probably hopefully leave the world a little better place. To that point, I really want to talk about, I want to add to what both of you said. I truly believe it's a business function. It is about innovation. It is about everyone has a role to play, but it is also pure business sense. And I want to bring that in. I think one of the conversations I often have with our senior business leaders is, where is your buying power? And are you clear where that buying power is going to shift in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years? How are you franchising or defranchising different customer cohorts? Example, if in the US, 10 years from now, if the buying power is going to be with the black community, what are you doing in terms of your marketplace to make sure that that community feels respected today in the way we are investing in our future, in the business? And if we're not doing that, then we're not going to wake up 10 years down the line. Somebody else would have taken that space. So I think it's as much about innovation, as much about commitment from all, but it's as much about just pure business sense.
Absolutely. DEI really makes business sense. And I think it is not just for today, it's for the future that we need to be worried about as well. And whatever actions that we take today are really going to be impacting us as well as the future generations. I think that's a lovely takeaway for me from you, Swati. Let me move on to Shanti. What's your take on unconscious bias? And how do you think that can be managed, or in practice, how is Target looking at managing it?
I'll say firstly, don't kid yourself that you're not biased.
True.
Be very realistic. Like Swati mentioned, sometimes it's just about conscious bias. And data tells you a lot. Insights tell you a lot. Open conversations tell you a lot. Brave conversations tell you a lot about how you are doing in terms of biases. At Target, we are a retailer in the US, and that 2,000 plus stores that we have, our guests are a representation of the community for us, right? Each of our guests is maybe less than 10 miles away from a Target store. So for us, it starts from, is my team member base a reflection of my guest? And like Swati had called out, right? It's just true business sense. And I'm hoping that in the future, 5 years down the line, you don't need 4 leaders telling business, wake up, it makes business sense. I hope it becomes business as usual for business leaders to start thinking about that, right? So just representation of what our guest is to what our team members is, because you are solving for that guest. You are solving for that business. You are solving for that guest to come back to you in different ways and forms. For unconscious bias at Target, while it is a learning moment for every new joiner, there are different layers that we bring in the topic of bias with our people leaders and try and build it in different dimensions. How does bias show up for gender? How does bias show up for the LGBTQ community? How does bias show up for generation? How does bias show up for regional diversity? An interesting thing that during COVID that we did was, how does bias show up for emotional inclusion? Right? So just creating those learning moments, creating that, that conversation is the first step, and not judging your audience to say, hey, I don't know about this, tell me more. So infusing those conversations in your daily work is very, very important. And I know we are somewhere touching about equity as much as it is important to our pillars of D and I, right? I'm actually going to give you, as an audience, one task. Go back to your work calendar for the next, maybe, let's say, 2 weeks, right? I'm sure you all have meetings lined up, conversations lined up, one-on-ones lined up. Maybe pick up one important meeting that you can prep differently from the angle of equity and bias. And prep intentionally for that from these two angles of how can I bring more equity into this conversation? How can I bring in more visibility to bias? Look at your calendar, pick that important meeting, do some prep and see the difference that you can make by just bringing this topic into the conversation and into the solution. And it could be simple things like, should I include someone else in this conversation? Should there be a diverse perspective? Is my perspective backed on data? Is my perspective leaning towards a particular community or a particular solution or a particular way that we have done things, right? So why not try something new? Like my girlfriends here called out, innovation is important. Inclusion will start by why not this? I know in the past we've only done this. Let's try something new. Let's fail fast. So progress over perfection, right? That's one task that I'm going to leave you all with, that one meeting that you can show up differently from the angle of equity and bias.
That's lovely, Shanti, really giving all of us an action item. And maybe I think we should go a step further to see, well, if that works out well for one meeting, why not for more and more till we make it a habit. And then we don't really need to keep talking about DEI on the dais of going forward forums anymore. But I think we still have a long way to go.
We do.
Well, it's a good wish to have at this point in time. Let me slightly change gears. See, when we join an organization, and all of us work for organizations where we are obviously passionate about, and each organization has its own culture. And when somebody new joins, we do keep prompting them, saying that, yes, ours is a great organization, and of course it's highly intangible, but we do have a great organizational culture. So somewhere the expectation is that the new joinees and the existing employees align to the organizational culture. But on the other hand, we are talking about diversity, we are talking about varied thoughts, varied experiences from all of them. So is there a clash, or is there a fine balancing to be done? Nandini, maybe can you give me your take on this?
Sure. So I constantly believe in thinking together, because diversity, equity, and inclusion is never an off-the-shelf solution that can be offered for any business situation. Because each situation is unique, different, and depending on where in the earth you are located, which industry you're part of. And there was an interesting conversation way back in my career when I was asked about to describe what's the culture of India. My probing question was, do you want me to talk about India as a country? Or would you want me to pinpoint on where are the locations where X company is located to give you that culture? And then, would you want me to also specify the business and the function, the subcultures that are there? And within that, there could be, again, subcultures. So for me, what stands out, my take is, let's not have a clean, clear slate that talks about this is culture. One could be a broader aspect of being an equitable and inclusive culture, but that way also we need to understand what inclusion and equity means to that organization, to that industry, looking at the marketplace, looking at the operating environment. Second, what are those voices that are missing in the room? Figuring out that to define what culture means for us would be crucial. Once that is done, and you brought in the concept of new hires, and I am a Gen Xer, and I come from that era where many a times I was asked, or rather assessed, whether I'm a culture fit. Well, some organizations are doing away with that, because if you're getting culture fit people as your diverse talent, then somewhere we are missing the game. Who will challenge the status quo? Who will bring in diversity of thought? And how do you make business sense when you don't have diversity of thought? Because that leads to innovation. And when you have innovation, be it a product company, be it a services industry, IT, whatever, it all depends on innovation. And that's the pivotal point of organizational sustainability. We cannot stray away from the ESG focus, because that drives every organization. And to your point, when we have to curate that business sense as to why diversity, equity, and inclusion is a business imperative, ESG dialogue has to come to the forefront. So culture, define what culture means to you from an equity and inclusion lens. Use that to have it embedded in the strategic focus of the organization. Create measures, because there could be certain intangible part, but most of the part are tangible. So how do you make the business connection? How do you make it tangible? And I will draw your attention to a very simple exercise that we as HR very often do within our organizations, the employee engagement survey, the pulse surveys. And I'm sure most of us would be keeping our eyes on the low score and the high score. Have we ever thought of the middle layer, which is the maximum in percentile? Have we tried interpreting why are people choosing not to agree or disagree more? There could be many interpretations. As a DEI practitioner, I interpret it in 3 different ways. Just to give you a simple example in the interest of the time. One, I'm not interested as to what happens. As long as I come to work, I get my paycheck at the end of the month. I'm done. That's one attitude. May not be good for the organization, because we are trying to build teaming and collaboration. We are trying to build an environment of innovation. So if your people are disengaged to the culture and the environment and the experience around, then there is a problem. After that, there could be another interpretation that I may have tried raising my voice, and I'll bring to your attention again, most of the organizations today are talking about speak up culture. Speak up if you see something's not working. Speak up if you see certain systemic biases. Speak up if you want to bring in change. Speak up if there are any discriminations. But I ask a question in return. Have we built psychological safety in the environment to speak up so that people feel fearless to speak up? Because if I have a doubt of being judged, if I have a fear of being retaliated against, if I have a fear of not being considered for any high visible projects or global projects, or if I have a fear where I may not be that go-to person for the senior leadership in the organization, then better I choose to be silent. So that's the second interpretation. The third interpretation could be, I tried, it didn't happen, I don't care, as long as I'm doing my work and going back home. So keep your eyes on that middle section, which is quite fleshy in terms of percentile, as you keep your eyes on the high and the lows. So that would be one. So define your culture, keep your eyes on those aspects of surveys that talks about disengagement in the environment. That means somewhere something with respect to culture is not ticking right. And the third could be, how are we enabling listening sessions where hierarchical strata is done away with? Simple habits of seeking what's working, what's not working, what could be different. Speaking and listening. Listening sounds very easy. That's the most toughest habit. So are we actively listening to the voices unheard? And also, let me point out another aspect. Are we listening to the silence? Silence speaks louder than voice. So as DEI practitioners, I would want to leave you with these thoughts. Go back to your environment of workplaces and see what you can find with your lens of equity and inclusion with respect to culture, and see how you can onboard the new hires and the lateral hires and new people who are coming up in leadership positions, and also ensure, because I know there are many learning professionals here, whatever learning interventions you are curating, keep equity inclusion mindset as part of it. Without that, you are not enabling a leader to be effective and successful in the long run.
Very strong sentiments. Thank you for that. And I just want to pick up on one part that you talked about, and maybe I'll pass it on to you, Swati. Of course, I would like to hear from you on what do you think about the culture possible, is there a fine balancing to be done? And maybe also pick up a little on the retaliation, the non-retaliation policy that organizations have. How effective is it? And maybe what could be the right way to do that? So if you could add that in as well, that will be helpful.
Sure. I think Nandi's covered quite a bit of it. So I'm going to probably make it possibly very practical in terms of simple things that we've experimented with the intent, which Nandini brought out. And I think all of what she said is super, super important. And I think that goes to the heart of what DEI is all about. One of the simplest mechanisms she talked of was listening. So how do you enable listening conversations where we actually encourage reverse mentoring, or the concept of human library, where you actually engage with senior leaders who are no longer mentoring youngsters, but the youngsters who are mentoring your senior leaders. I think that works really beautifully. Or what you would tend to call as reverse talent, and what I would call as underrepresented communities or underrepresented individuals or groups of people in the organization, how do they mentor our leadership? I think that works beautifully because that also addresses the psychological safety, because you're actually giving them a formal role. You're saying you are now the mentor to the CEO or the CFO or the CMO, and we want you to mentor them on this aspect, right? And that kind of gives the confidence and the ability to speak up and to say a few things which are going on. And then you start to say, okay, what are your pain points? What are your experiences that you want solved for? What I've often seen is most senior leaders get there because they're good, right? In most cases. So they care. What often they forget to do is they stop listening at some point of time. So if you force the listening function, they really want to fix it. So when they hear a reverse mentor coming and telling them what the experience of most employees on the ground is, they're severely shocked. And they're like, this happens in my team or in my organization, I'm going to fix it, right? And then you kind of fade out. It gets fixed between the two people, right? So you solve it together. The other is, Amazon is a very doc culture. One of the things we do in our documents very actively is we ask individuals to say, whatever you're proposing, give us a really good reason why not to do it. Why will this fail? Why should we not do what you are recommending in 6 pages to do? Please give us the half page on why not to do this. It forces you to think differently. It forces you to critique your own idea and say what will work, or go and find people who do not agree with your idea and give you good reasons on why not to do it, right? We seek being vocally self-critical. It's a very, very important trait in leadership. Can you deconstruct what you are proud of and critique yourself and say, here's what I could have done differently, even if this was successful? I think that helps. So these are some very simplistic things. You talked about anti-retaliation. I think I'm going to go back to Jeff B. I love Jeff B's quotes a lot. So good intentions don't matter, mechanisms do, right? So having anti-retaliation as a mindset is a good intention. Having a policy is also a good intention. A mechanism is actually actively encouraging. So for me, a mechanism is a senior leader actually having TGIF sessions or open sessions which are focused on the intent of saying, and sometimes we actually consciously create what we call as power of anecdotes. So we pick up anecdotes from employees, and we purposefully raise those questions with leadership in a very open forum, saying, here is how people are experiencing you. How do you think about it? And for the leader to be able to say yes, and to be vulnerable, and to be authentic, and to say, here is, yes, maybe I did this, or maybe I said it, or maybe I was working like this, and thank you for bringing it to my notice, gives an enormous amount of confidence. You can have all policies around anti-retaliation. Until the leader is willing to be authentic and honest and vocally self-critical in public, it's not going to work.
That is really a good way of enhancing transparency, and I think that is what really leads to inclusive behavior as well, a feeling of inclusion. And just staying on Amazon, and I know the kind of document process that you all follow. I've heard that you do have a lot of tenets around DEI. So can you talk about some of them and how that has really helped Amazon to be a more inclusive kind of workspace?
I want to start with saying that I don't think we are anywhere close to being what we would like to be. Right? So I want to be super honest about that. It's a journey, and it's going to continue to be a very, very long journey. And I want to start with why tenets. We have tenets because we realize that the world around us is changing. The expectations that customers or employees had, even when I joined the workforce, was primarily that I have a safe workplace, I have an interesting workplace, I get good work to do. I don't have discrimination in workplace, and I'm happy. My employees of today are not happy with that. They want me to have position statements on issues which are global. So one of our real issues today, and many of you would read it in the newspapers, and I'm being super honest about it here, is our employees in the US expect us to have a position statement around anti-abortion. Our employees in the US expect us to have a position on transphobic behavior. It's not about what we do as a position inside of Amazon. They expect us to take it up with legislators. They expect us to have a formal official position as a company in the community, right? So that's a huge shift in what's happening to the dynamic of our profession as HR, right? And therefore, many of you in this room who are HR professionals would recognize that your job is no longer about what happens inside the workplace, but what happens outside the workplace for the people you wish to attract and retain. And with that, then you have to approach it almost like any other business problem to say, what will define what positions we should or should not have, right? So that's why the tenets. Tenets help us make decisions when we don't know what to do, right? Or when there are conflicting options available to us and we need to make a decision. So for us, tenets, for example, include, and we have 7 of them, but I'll talk a few, right, in the interest of time, say what does it matter? I mean, what tenets are? 1, diverse representation is not enough, is one tenet, for example. You can do a ton of stuff by doing tokenism and hiring tons of, diverse employees in different places. It's not enough. You've got to measure yourself against, are they happy at your workplace? Are they being treated fairly? What mechanisms do you have to grow them? Right? What are you doing long term so that it's a sustainable mechanism to hire and grow? So diverse representation is not enough, right? Second, we build with global communities in mind. So you don't build on behalf, you build with the community that you want to address, right? That's a really important tenet for us. So ERGs, employee resource groups, affinity groups become very crucial in your journey. Last night, I was spending time with an affinity group discussing what should our hate speech policy with reference to books that we sell on our platform be, right? That's a super, you build with them, saying, what should it be? What should we hold our authors responsible for? What should that policy be? How do we communicate that? Equity and equality both matter. You cannot over-rotate on one or the other. You cannot say equality no longer matters and it's only equity, because then you're going to alienate a set of people. So both matter. And how are you going to manage the two? Right? Data is important, but not the only indicator of how you're doing on DEI. So we're a very data-centric company. We want to have data on everything in the world, right? Saying exactly what's the equity funnel, talent representation, and which is statistically significant and not significant. We do all that, but that's not enough. Sometimes it's just common sense. Sometimes it's just judgment. Sometimes it's just gut, that this is the right thing to do, and so we will do it. And there are many more, but I think it just helps us to have those tenets.
Wonderful, wonderful. Amazing. In fact, mind-blowing, I should say. So let me just pass on. I know we're conscious of time, so please do alert me. This is a very interesting conversation. Let me move on to Shanti. See, difference is something that we all are seeing every day and we have to live with. but there are different dimensions to differences as well. So how do you as HR build your no D&I initiatives around that?
Build it on the foundation of allyship, build it on the foundation of just being kind in a culture. Nandini spoke about how we are thinking only about culture fit. Think about who can evolve your culture. When you're hiring someone, is this person fitting in my culture? Is this person fitting in my dimension? Or is this person bringing a difference, bringing a different point of view that I can celebrate because I want to evolve my culture? And I know that we are the only ones standing between you and your coffee right now, or between you and your Uber right now. So I will say just thinking from an angle of what is sustainable for the future if I think about it today. What can I solve for the future through my D&I initiatives, through allyship and taking the people along? It's not just going to a certain destination, it's who you take along with you. Most of our D&I initiatives are based on the culture that we have at Target, which is care for each other, grow together, win together. So that care, grow, win is our broad tenet that we follow for anything related to DEI.
Care, grow, win. Wow. That's good. I know we are running short of time. Sorry? Yeah, that's great. I wasn't expecting that, so it's a bonus.
I know, it says time's up, so thank you for the 3 minutes.
Yeah, so maybe a quick round with all of you. Maybe I can start with Nandini. We're talking so much about inclusion, and to me it sounds very, very personal and very physical. How do I know what somebody's feeling if I don't see them, if I don't talk to them? So how have you been managing all this in the pandemic and the post-hybrid, remote work and all of that?
So I think I would speak for myself, what I did. I continued to have those check-in moments beyond work. It could have been half a second, 1 second, or a minute, just to check in how you're doing, how's everybody around. Do you need any support? How can I be of support to you? Not only to my stakeholders, but beyond. I activated my business resource groups and my inclusion ambassadors to be sensitive and penetrate deep in order to understand the environment and the ecosystem around, and be a critical feedback loop into the organization. That's what BRGs and ERGs are all about. So activation of ERGs, activation of inclusion ambassadors, having regular leadership connects, having connects with the communication team to ensure that we amplified communication to enable two-way dialogues. So all hands call, everything mattered where employee questions were taken, and those most uncomfortable. We started off a series called the Inclusion and Me series, where we brought in the most uncomfortable conversations like proximity bias. We talked about promotions in the world where social distancing is the norm. We talked about different aspects of HR functioning as an umbrella function to understand how we could be building inclusive language, learning opportunities for people to attract the learning. And we also ensured that there was a huge bid taken in terms of culture transformation from a psychological safety perspective, at the same time keeping a close tab on the ethics complaint to see anonymous complaint versus with name, trends of complaints coming in. So everything was monitored to create a holistic health around inclusion to ensure we are connected.
That's great. I think it's really been holistic the way you explained it. Swati, any quick takes from you?
I'm going to be adding. So I think sometimes it's important to know that just because it's virtual, it's not that you can't do what you did. So you party virtually, right? And we've been doing a lot of that, saying just create the same environment. You've got these lovely, world is very innovative. So there are companies which stand up overnight to be able to manage that for you. So just like you had event management companies who set up physical spaces, now you have event management companies who set up virtual spaces to have a lot of fun with your people. So how do you do that so that the informal piece continues? We use a product called Chime for all our meetings. So one of the simplest things we did was everybody, please be on video. Doesn't matter how you're dressed. Doesn't matter you have 2 kids sitting on your lap at the same time. It makes no difference, just be on video. We just want to experience you in the room. You can't say bring your whole authentic self to work but be off video, right? So please be your authentic self. If that means you're in your PJs or you haven't put on makeup, it's fine. Just be there, right? So I think that starts to matter. So a ton of things like that. But the most innovative piece which I found, which some of our teams did, was a concept called multi-log. This is super. What they did was they picked up employee anecdotes, and we work with a theater company who actually convert those anecdotes into drama, right? And we take those dramas and we get a senior, very, very senior leadership teams to debrief the actual role play, the theater actors, as they're doing it in 3 parts. We record the leaders as they're debriefing it because they're teaching culture, saying what just happened, how would I deal with it, what decisions would I make, right? And this is the senior most leadership doing that. And we then broadcast that to the rest of the organization. So you learn a way to teach culture through drama because you're no longer being able to do it in person. So you start to think of really different ideas to make the virtual space a physical space in some ways.
Very innovative. Shanti, your take?
We're still figuring out hybrid. We're not there yet. We were all working from home. Now we're all half distributed. So I think for us, it has been important to continue listening. So we infused listening forums at every level. Like sometimes when you say the same thing 7 different times, 7 different ways, the messaging sticks, right? So trying to hear what our team members are feeling, what they want, where they need support, just amplifying those listening moments and letting our senior leadership drive that has been really powerful for us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I could go on and on with these 3 ladies, but I'm sure we have, and I'm also seeing the time is up. It's been really lovely having all of you here, and I do hope you've been able to take a lot of learnings from what our eminent panelists have experienced and have driven in their organizations. So thank you so much for a patient listening, and thank you so much, dear panelists.